Welcome back. Today we do a quick one on the INTUAURA Balance. INTUAURA. I'm not sure how to pronounce their name, nor am I sure why it says Luna on the faceplate either. But mysteries aside, this is a very, very nice dynamic driver. And what's a little bit different about this one, they have this kind of large vent here, and I would say that that is part of their pressure equalization system. So you shouldn't really be getting any pressure buildup. You shouldn't get any driver flex on this one. It should feel very, very ventilated, and perhaps that is venting a little bit of the bass, as it has a very, very nicely controlled bass as well. This is the cable, kind of a nice 8-core SPC style. It is not modular or anything special. It's just kind of a nice looking SPC. So we'll kind of slide these out of the way and we'll kind of jump into it from there. So what is this one? They call it a neutral tonal precision 10mm dynamic driver. Has a DLC and a peak composite diaphragm and that air pressure equalization system. So again, I think as time has gone on and IAMs have gotten more popular, I do think that as more and more people use them, they're noticing that some IAMs do build up pressure. Some of them do have driver flex, and that tends to annoy people who are new to the hobby. So I do kind of give them a lot of credit for coming up with, something new, something a little bit different, something to address that specific problem. And they did price this one at about $159. So what do you notice about the graph when you take a look at it? And the first thing I noticed was, well, it looks very similar to quite a few sets: Dunu Kima 2, Tangim's Fission, Sivga's Q, KZ's Zenith. This is a not very, very popular tuning style, but it's kind of a popular style, I would say. I wouldn't say it's super popular, but as soon as I saw the graph, I sort of knew that I was going to like them. And it's a popular style. I like most of these sets. I sort of knew I was going to like Balance right away. When you look at it against the Harman target, and you could almost see the Harman target in the dotted line there, you're sort of looking at slightly less sub bass from the Harman target, more mid bass, slightly less in the upper mids, and then this kind of a 5K dip, so it doesn't sound too bright or have a bright spot or sound peaky, just a little bit more relaxed in the 5K. Instead of how some sets do, they do kind of a lower upper mid and then try to bump up the 5K. I sort of like this traditional style of just fly under the Harman target, but then dip the 5K and then adjust the treble, and that kind of gives you the different flavors of this style tuning. So yeah, very, very nice graph. So I knew I was going to like it right away, but as I said, I would actually like all of these sets for almost the same reason. So why do these sets tend to sound a little bit different? Why do I tend to like them a lot? Because they have a full bass shelf, right? You've got this sub bass level, which isn't rising. It's not kind of booming. They put in enough mid bass, so it actually has a lower mid body. It avoids the lean, thin sound that you get on the Harman target style, things that follow the Harman target a little properly or closely. The upper mids are set back from the Harman target, so it maintains the balance and it doesn't kind of shift or lean into that shouty female vocal style, which you kind of get on sets that, again, that follow the Harman target a little bit closer. The sub bass dip avoids the typical boominess and allows a natural treble extension instead of boosting over the boom. So again, there's just kind of slight tweaks. If you can call this Harman style, but it's not really. They've made some kind of changes. So this is going to be lower, and that's going to be more. This is going to be less, and those kind of, I would say they are similar, but it addresses some of the issues that people have with using the Harman target with different genres of music. And for those of you with nicer amps, this bass shelf, this one that has some mid bass, that is going to pick up some details beyond your typical all pluck, no resonance, lean style U shape. You listen between the plucks is really what you're listening for. And again, a lot of sets drop this 200 level down to kind of the Harman target, down to the floor. And that doesn't necessarily pick up a lot of the detail in the lower mids or in the upper bass. this whole area becomes quite lean, and it sounds like the pluck, right? You hear kind of the sharpness of a pluck, but you don't necessarily hear the back end of it. And that's sort of what this whole pluck and no resonance, that style of set, that's kind of a different style. And this one will pick up a lot of that lower resonance. And it just sounds slightly different. Those of you who are really into very, very clean style sets, the ones that do are all pluck, this might not be for you. But for those of you who have kind of stood in front of a acoustic guitar, you sort of understand what I'm talking about. There is a pluck, but there should also be some back end resonance to it. And that's a little bit harder to actually reproduce if you drop this too low and it sounds too bright. You end up with just hearing major, or for the most part, just that pluck. And that's kind of what that was little about. So why would you pick Balance over the other sets? And I'll say again, the Balance of the name is actually quite right. It does sound very natural, but the details come through. It sounds speedy with some nice edges, and it really avoided the full-bodied but lower res sound of Kima 2. And again, this style doesn't always play well with lower volume. There's kind of a few sets here that didn't play well with lower volume. I think Zenith is one that doesn't really do low volume all that well. Q is kind of another one that it kind of works at low volume, maybe not as much. Fission, again, is kind of another one that had a little bit harder to deal with at lower volume because it tends to sound a little bit warm. So part of the reason why you always see this 200 level a bit lower, because as you turn down the volume, this becomes more prominent, more present, and it can sound very, very warm. So where Balance is a little bit different is you don't get that warmth, that overwhelming warmth doesn't really happen at lower volume. And it sounds, it almost scales really, really well from low volume to upper volume. It really maintains composure, maintains the tuning from low volume to upper volume, and it kind of sets itself apart from the other ones, simply for that reason. But second, I think a lot of it is the resolve. I think the balance that they achieved here with Balance, sort of Kima 2 had this thing where it didn't quite sound as resolved as some nicer single dynamic drivers. When you're looking at a $160 single dynamic driver, you want something that sounds, kind of bordering on a hybrid. It should sound quite resolved. It should sound nicely defined. It should have some nice edges to it. The vocal should have some nice articulation to it. And on some of the single dynamic drivers that sound a little bit softer, you didn't quite come across, even though the tuning was very, very general appealing and still had the full body and it still sounded very natural, kind of exactly how I would describe Kima 2. It doesn't quite have the technical level of some other sets, and especially the pricier ones. So again, when you're charging $159, you need to step up your tech game a little bit, and it does need to sound quite resolved. It does need to have those edges. It does need to sound very articulate on the vocals. So that's kind of where I would say that Balance kind of stepped away from these other sets. And I would still pick Zenith. I mean, Zenith at the price point at $50 and less is still kind of a crazy bargain for what it was. If you are a lower volume listener, I would say you're probably going to be better off with Balance. If you're a higher volume, you can kind of move back and forth between Zenith and Balance and probably be okay. But I do think that Balance, while it might be a little bit pricier, is probably a general, all-around better set for more people than Zenith is. But I'd be fine with either one. I'm probably fine with any of the sets here. Again, this tuning very much appeals to me. I could put on any of these sets and enjoy music. I don't really nitpick them that much because I know kind of exactly what I'm getting here. So the bass, again, very much my preference. Try to hit the neutral sub bass and mid bass, so both sound as one. They should sound seamless together. And when I say full body, that's really what you're listening for on this style tuning. You're listening for that proper weight and body, not boosted, not stepping out of place, sounds controlled and vented, right? You're trying to avoid the boominess here. You're trying to avoid over thickness here. And that's why, Balance is a very appropriate name. That's why I said this bass shelf is going to be a little bit lower here. It's going to gently rise above the Harman target, and that's just to give you the body. But if you push this too far up, it turns into kind of a bass head style, becomes too thick, it kind of hits too hard, it kind of steps out of place. So again, why all of these three sets are hitting such a close range on the bass shelf, because these values tend to work for this style tuning, and anything above them or below them tends to show itself in ways that'll take you to a different flavor, but not necessarily achieving some of the same goals that you're going to get on Balance. So the mids, again, where some in this style have problems balancing the bass and the treble levels, very hard to achieve both a natural weight and resolve, as it requires a lot of balance at both ends. But when it's done right, like it's done on balance, the mids are slightly forward. They're revealed in a way that will show off your treble problems. Too much treble, too little treble, that will get you sort of a less natural sound, a less resolved sound. The idea is to sound end-to-end seamless. No booms, no peaks, no bright spots, resolved coherence. And resolved coherence is just words that I just made up, but it's the idea that you have a single dynamic driver. From end to end, it should sound quite seamless. It's a single dynamic driver. It should sound that way anyway. But the kind of resolve part of that, I think where other dynamic drivers, and Kima is probably one of them, where they bring the treble level just slightly lower, and you can kind of say, well, that improves coherence because there's no sibilance, there's no peakiness, there's nothing out there. And that's probably true, but they kind of constrained it and restrained the treble, brought it down to such a conservative, safe level that it didn't show off the resolve that dynamic driver can do. So where I would say that balance actually kind of takes the lead in that respect is it did a better job of revealing the mids, but also having a treble level that really presented this nice edge, this nice resolve. It sounds, high resolution in a way that some of these other sets didn't quite do it. So yeah, again, these are all very similar flavors. Balance is just kind of doing it better in a way on a nicer driver. And again, it's just a very, very nice set. So the treble, again, most of these sets have nice dynamic drivers. This one has a nice dynamic driver. Just need to stay in the range where it doesn't stray off natural, right? The bass level is lower. It allows for lower treble levels. Just need to give it enough to get that well-defined, almost hybrid edge. Kind of exactly how I would describe balance. You don't need to boost the upper mids to give the female vocals that slight edge. Once you reveal the mids, they will have a nice edge if you have a nice dynamic driver. You don't need to boost anything. You don't need to boost the 5K. You don't need to put a 15K bump in there. You should have a nice edge if you have a nice dynamic driver. It should be fast enough to present that style edge, to give you that vocal articulation, so it actually sounds like you're almost right next to that person singing. It sounds like a very well-recorded voice, right? They have a really nice, sharp, well-defined edge to it. And that's what you should get on this style tuning on a nice dynamic driver with a proper treble level. And that's exactly what you're going to get here. But, keep the lower treble balanced with the upper treble, that lowered 5K, like that little dip right there. And you complete the end-to-end seamless sound, right? So we talked about the sub bass not booming, mid bass not too thick, not too shouty in the upper mids, not too peaky at 5K, and then just kind of gently roll over, but provide enough treble contributions so everything sounds nicely sharp and defined. And you do all of that so it sounds coherent, but also nicely resolved. And again, that is my made-up word, resolved coherence. So stage, again, I would always say that well-balanced tunings almost always stage well. This one is no different. Maybe not as sharp as imaging as a U-shape. Again, I think part of the advantage of doing this and doing that all pluck style sound, you get super sharp imaging, right? You have a very dark black background. You have very well-defined, very sharp notes, especially in the slower mid. Everything sounds very, very clean. You have this really, really nice sharp imaging. That's probably better for gaming. This style tuning is probably better for sounding natural, where you don't necessarily need all that cleanliness. You want to hear reproduction of the whole frequency range seamlessly and in a coherent manner, and that's what this tuning would do. So again, maybe not as sharp as those, but balance hits the right treble levels. It does project outward. It does have the mid bass for the depth, and it does present lots of space in a way that a well-balanced, well-tuned single dynamic should, and that's exactly what happens here on Balance. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.